Tuesday is not my day for being philosophical, but when the morning mail includes an envelope that knows more about our business than it should, philosophy has a way of forcing itself on you whether you want it or not. I was sitting at my desk in the office of the old brownstone on West 35th Street, trying to convince our bank statement that we had enough money to keep the lights on, when Fritz appeared in the doorway with his usual morning collection of bills, threats, and invitations to spend money we didn't have. The unusual delivery. Among the usual stack was an envelope that made me sit up straighter. Heavy cream paper, the kind that costs more per sheet than most people spend on lunch. No return address, but my name and Wolfe's were typed with the precision of someone who takes correspondence seriously. The postmark was local, Manhattan, but that told me nothing useful. What told me something was the way it was addressed. Mr. Nero Wolfe and Mr. Archie Goodwin, Confidential Investigation Services. We don't advertise under that name. We don't advertise at all. Yet someone had not only found us, but knew exactly what we did and how we preferred to be approached. I slit the envelope with my letter opener and found two items inside. A cashier's check for $5,000 made out to Nero Wolfe, and a single sheet of the same expensive paper with a brief message typed in the center. Mr. Wolfe, you are retained for services to be specified. The bearer of this letter does not exist in any official capacity, cannot appear in person, and will contact you only through intermediaries. A reputation has been systematically destroyed through methods that leave no legal recourse. The perpetrator operates with impunity because their methods are technically lawful, but morally corrupt. Intellectual justice is required. Further instructions will follow if you accept this retainer. A client who never existed. Wolfe's response. It was 10:45, which meant Wolfe would be down from the plant rooms in exactly 15 minutes. I had that long to decide whether to present this as a curiosity or a case. The check was real enough. I could tell by the weight of the paper and the precision of the printing. $5,000 doesn't materialize out of thin air, even when it comes from clients who claim not to exist. At 11 o'clock sharp, Wolfe descended in the elevator and entered the office with his usual measured tread. He settled into his custom-made chair behind the desk, accepted the glass of beer Fritz brought him, and looked at me with the expression of a man who expected the world to justify its existence to him on a daily basis. Good morning, Archie. Any mail of consequence? I handed him the letter and the check. A retainer from someone who doesn't exist for a case that isn't specified, involving a crime that may not be illegal. He read the letter twice, examined the check with the attention he usually reserved for rare orchids, and set both items on his desk with deliberate care. Interesting, he said, which from Wolfe was equivalent to a brass band playing fanfare. Interesting enough to take seriously. A client who acknowledges their own non-existence demonstrates either remarkable honesty or sophisticated manipulation. He took a sip of beer. The former is rare. The latter is intriguing. The check is genuine. Looks like it. Drawn on Manhattan Merchants Bank. Account number obscured. Someone with access to serious money. The hook deepens. Wolfe leaned back in his chair, his eyes half closed in the expression that meant his brain was working at full capacity. A reputation systematically destroyed through lawful but morally corrupt methods. That suggests someone with institutional power, corporate, academic, or governmental. The emphasis on intellectual justice rather than legal remedy indicates the perpetrator has remained within technical bounds while achieving destructive ends. So we're looking for someone who ruins people without breaking any laws? Precisely. And someone who has done so with sufficient skill that the victim requires my particular talents to achieve redress. He opened his eyes and looked at me. The question is whether this anonymous client seeks justice or revenge. Does it matter? It matters greatly. Justice can be achieved through exposure and restoration. Revenge requires destruction in return. I prefer the former. Before I could respond, the phone rang. I answered it with my usual professional charm. Nero Wolfe's office, Archie Goodwin speaking. Mr. Goodwin. The voice was female, cultured, with the kind of precise diction that comes from expensive education and careful practice. I believe Mr. Wolfe received a letter this morning. We receive many letters. This one came with a substantial retainer and a promise of further contact. I looked at Wolfe, who was watching me with the intensity of a cat studying a mouse hole. And you would be? The intermediary mentioned in the letter. My instructions are to determine whether Mr. Wolfe will accept the case. What case? The letter was notably short on specifics. The systematic destruction of Dr. Miranda Kellerman's reputation and career. She was a respected forensic accountant until 6 months ago, when a series of carefully orchestrated events made her unemployable in her field. The perpetrator used her own expertise against her, creating a web of apparent conflicts of interest and ethical violations that exist only in perception, not in fact. The client emerges. Now we were getting somewhere. And Dr. Kellerman is your client who doesn't exist. Dr. Kellerman exists. Her professional reputation, however, has been so thoroughly destroyed that she might as well not exist in any meaningful sense. She cannot approach Mr. Wolfe directly because any association with a private investigator would be seen as further evidence of her alleged misconduct. I made notes. While she talked, my shorthand keeping pace with her careful explanations. Who's the perpetrator? That is what Dr. Kellerman needs, Mr. Wolfe, to determine. She has suspicions, but no proof. The methods used were sophisticated, requiring inside knowledge of her work and her vulnerabilities. Wolfe gestured for the phone. I handed it to him. Madame, he said in his most formal tone, if I am to consider this matter, I require a complete account of the alleged destruction, including all relevant documentation and a list of potential suspects. Can this be arranged without compromising Dr. Kellerman's position further? Yes, I can deliver everything to your office this afternoon. Dr. Kellerman has prepared a comprehensive file. Very well. 4 o'clock. He handed the phone back to me, but the line was already dead. Setting the stage. So, I said, hanging up the receiver, we have a client who exists but can't be seen with us, an intermediary who won't give her name, and a case involving the destruction of someone's reputation through methods that are legal but unethical. Just another typical Tuesday in the brownstone. Wolfe's expression was thoughtful. Dr. Miranda Kellerman. The name is familiar. She testified in the Hartwell Industries fraud case last year. Her analysis exposed a complex embezzlement scheme that sent 3 executives to prison, making her some powerful enemies. Indeed. And if someone has successfully destroyed her credibility, they have effectively neutralized one of the most competent forensic accountants in the city. He paused, considering. That suggests the perpetrator either has something to hide or wishes to prevent Dr. Kellerman from exposing future misconduct. So we take the case? We take the case, Archie. But we proceed with exceptional caution. If someone has the skill and resources to destroy a reputation as methodically as described, they will not hesitate to target anyone who threatens their success. I looked at the check again, then at the letter. $5,000 for a case that might not involve any actual crime, from a client who couldn't acknowledge hiring us to catch a perpetrator who might have committed no prosecutable offense. In other words, exactly the kind of intellectual puzzle that Nero Wolfe found irresistible. The sanctity of the brownstone had been breached by an envelope that knew too much and a voice that promised more mysteries than answers. But as I watched Wolfe settle back in his chair with the satisfied expression of a man who had just been presented with a problem worthy of his attention, I knew we were committed. The client, who never existed, had just hired the detective who never left his house, to solve a crime that might not be a crime at all. It was going to be an interesting week. If there's one thing that makes Nero Wolfe predictable, it's his schedule. 4 to 6 belongs to the orchids, which meant I'd be handling our mysterious intermediary alone. That suited me. Fine. I've always been better at reading people when they think they're only dealing with the hired helper. At 3:55, I positioned myself at the office window, not because I'm naturally suspicious, but because clients who claim not to exist deserve a careful look before they walk through your door. The street appeared normal enough, though I noticed a dark sedan parked across the way that hadn't been there an hour earlier. The woman who brought files. At exactly 4 o'clock, the doorbell announced our visitor. Fritz ushered in a woman who had clearly given considerable thought to not being memorable. She was somewhere in her 40s, with the kind of understated elegance that costs serious money to achieve, but looks effortless. Her dark hair was pulled back severely, and her charcoal suit was tailored to suggest competence without drawing attention. She carried herself with the confidence of someone accustomed to being the smartest person in the room, but her eyes held the wariness of someone who had learned not to trust that advantage. "Mr. Goodwin," she said, her voice carrying the same precise diction I'd heard on the phone. "I'm Dr. Sarah Vance. I represent Dr. Kellerman's interests in this matter." I gestured to the red leather chair. "Dr. Vance, welcome to our parlor. Mr. Wolfe is communing with his orchids, but I'm authorized to receive whatever you've brought us." She settled into the chair with careful movements, placing an expensive leather attaché case on her lap. "I should clarify my position, Mr. Goodwin. I'm professor of ethics at Columbia University, and I was Dr. Kellerman's colleague before her troubles began. I'm one of the few people in academic circles who still believes in her innocence. And you're willing to risk your own reputation to help her? Tenure has its privileges, including the freedom to associate with people whose reputations have been systematically destroyed." She opened the attaché case and withdrew a thick manila folder. "This contains Dr. Kellerman's complete documentation of her situation. She's approached it with the thoroughness you'd expect from a forensic accountant. The file and its contents." I accepted the folder, noting its weight. "Before I pass this along to Mr. Wolfe, give me your assessment. What exactly happened to Dr. Kellerman?" Dr. Vance's expression tightened. 6 months ago, Miranda Kellerman was the most respected forensic accountant in the city. Prosecutors called her when they needed testimony that couldn't be challenged. Then someone began a campaign to destroy that reputation through methods that were both brilliant and completely legal. Legal, but destructive. How? It began with a conflict of interest allegation. Dr. Kellerman was examining the books of Meridian Consulting when it was discovered she owned stock in a company that had done business with Meridian 2 years earlier. The stock purchase was legitimate and predated any knowledge of the case. But the appearance was damaging. I was taking notes, but I could see the pattern forming. And that was just the beginning. Over 4 months, 7 similar incidents occurred. Each time, Dr. Kellerman would accept a case, begin her investigation, and then some previously unknown connection would surface that created an apparent conflict of interest. Each instance was technically innocent, but professionally fatal. Someone was feeding information to create these appearances. Someone with access to confidential financial records and the skill to present legitimate transactions in the most damaging possible light. Dr. Vance met my eyes. Someone who understood both Dr. Kellerman's work patterns and her vulnerabilities. The suspects. She reached into her case again and produced a second folder. Dr. Kellerman has identified 5 individuals with the motive and means to orchestrate such a campaign. I opened the folder to find professional photographs with biographical summaries. Let's hear the lineup. Marcus Hartwell, former CEO of Hartwell Industries. Dr. Kellerman's testimony sent him to prison for embezzlement. He was released 4 months ago. Revenge motive, I noted. Dr. Janet Morrison, senior partner at Morrison, Klein and Associates. They lost the Meridian Consulting contract when Dr. Kellerman exposed their inadequate audit procedures. Professional rivalry with financial consequences. Thomas Brennan, city attorney. Dr. Kellerman's work made his office look incompetent on several high-profile cases. He's facing a difficult re-election campaign. Rebecca Sterling, investigative journalist. She built her reputation exposing financial corruption, but Dr. Kellerman's more thorough work often contradicted Sterling's conclusions. And finally, Dr. Michael Carver, professor of accounting at NYU and Dr. Kellerman's former mentor. They had a bitter falling out 3 years ago over methodological differences. Unwelcome visitors. Before I could ask more questions, the doorbell rang again. This time, Fritz appeared in the doorway looking distinctly unhappy. Mr. Goodwin, 2 gentlemen to see Mr. Wolfe. They say it's urgent legal business. I glanced at Dr. Vance, who had gone very still. Show them in, Fritz. 2 men entered, both wearing the kind of expensive suits that announce their profession before they open their mouths. The taller one, with a jaw that looked like it had been carved from granite, stepped forward. Mr. Goodwin, I'm Mr. Hyatt. This is Mr. Fell. We represent Bennett and Lyle, outside counsel to Northgate Logistics. We need to speak with Mr. Wolfe regarding misappropriated materials. Mr. Wolfe is occupied. You can speak with me. Hyatt's expression suggested he found this arrangement unsatisfactory. We have reason to believe, Doctor. Kellerman's work product, covered by non-disclosure agreements, was delivered to this address. Our clients require its immediate return. He offered an envelope with the kind of official letterhead that's designed to intimidate. I accepted it without enthusiasm. Gentlemen, you're assuming facts not in evidence. If you believe property of your clients is here, you're welcome to petition a court for a writ or file a police report. You're not welcome to make demands in my employer's office. Wolfe's entrance. As if summoned by the tension in the room, the elevator sighed and delivered Wolfe to his chair. He took in the scene with a single glance. Dr. Vance in the client chair, 2 lawyers standing stiffly, and me holding their threatening letter. Gentlemen, he said without preamble, state your business or leave my house. Hyatt tried to look reasonable. Mr. Wolfe, we represent Northgate Logistics. We have noticed that confidential documents belonging to our client were delivered here. We require their return and confirmation that no copies exist. Wolfe examined the letter Hyatt had provided, then set it aside with obvious distaste. Mr. Hyatt, your letter asserts misappropriation and confidentiality. It does not assert a law. If your client believes their property is here, they may obtain proper legal process. They may not send you to my door to make demands. Fell decided to contribute. Mr. Wolfe, avoiding a simple request, suggests you know what you have. I know that I have a file containing papers compiled by Dr. Miranda Kellerman. If your client believes those papers are their property, it is for them to establish that through proper channels, not for me to accept it because 2 men in expensive suits speak earnestly. The stakes revealed. Hyatt pulled out a second document. Dr. Kellerman signed a non-disclosure agreement with Northgate. It covers work product and any derivative analysis. She has no right to disseminate anything. Wolfe glanced at the document. The NDA, as you present it, is unsigned by the other party. Moreover, you have told me that Northgate is aware Dr. Kellerman has created analyses they consider sensitive. Your anxiety about dissemination suggests those analyses contain information damaging to your client. When this becomes a legal matter, Mr. Wolfe, your curiosity will be a liability. Legal matters are my specialty, Mr. Hyatt. Good day. After I'd shown the lawyers out, I returned to find Wolfe already examining Dr. Vance's files. She sat quietly, watching him read with the patience of someone accustomed to academic deliberation. Wolfe's assessment. Dr. Vance, Wolfe said without looking up. The campaign against Dr. Kellerman was sophisticated, patient, and extremely well informed. Whoever orchestrated it had access to confidential information and the ability to time revelations for maximum damage. That's our assessment as well. I will accept this case on one condition. Dr. Kellerman must agree to meet with me personally, despite the risks. I cannot solve a case of this complexity without direct consultation with the victim. Dr. Vance hesitated. That's exactly what she hoped to avoid. Nevertheless, it is essential. I require her personal assessment of each suspect and her professional opinion on the methods used against her. I'll ask her, but I can't guarantee she'll agree. She will agree, Wolfe said with certainty. Someone who has been as methodically destroyed as Dr. Kellerman will recognize that half measures are insufficient. She needs complete vindication. The game begins. After Dr. Vance left, I found Wolfe deep in the documentation, making notes in his precise handwriting. The folders were spread across his desk like battle plans. Thoughts? I asked. The perpetrator possesses remarkable skill and patience. They understood that destroying a forensic accountant's reputation required creating the appearance of the very conflicts she was trained to avoid. He looked up. Archie, tomorrow you will begin investigating our 5 suspects. I want to know their whereabouts during key incidents, their access to the information used against Dr. Kellerman, and any connections between them. And tonight we consider the implications of Mr. Hyatt's visit. Someone is sufficiently concerned about our involvement to send lawyers within hours of Dr. Vance's arrival. That suggests we've touched a nerve. I looked out the window. The dark sedan was still there, its occupants no doubt reporting our visitors to whoever was paying for surveillance. The brownstone's sanctity had been thoroughly breached, first by a client who didn't exist, then by an intermediary who risked her reputation, and finally by lawyers who made threats they couldn't enforce. But as I watched Wolfe settle into his reading, I knew we were exactly where he preferred to be, at the center of an intellectual puzzle that promised to test every skill he possessed. The client, who never existed, had succeeded in drawing Nero Wolfe into a game where reputation was the weapon and justice was the prize. Tomorrow, the real investigation would begin. Wednesday morning brought the kind of crisp October air that makes even the most cynical New Yorker believe in fresh starts, which was ironic considering I was about to spend the day digging into 5 people's motives for destroying someone's career. Wolfe had finished his morning session with the orchids and settled behind his desk with the satisfied expression of a man who had spent 2 hours with organisms that never lied, cheated, or held grudges. Archie, he said, accepting his first beer of the day from Fritz, we have established that Dr. Kellerman was systematically destroyed through methods that required intimate knowledge of her work and exceptional timing. Today, you will meet our 5 suspects and determine which possesses both the means and the temperament for such an undertaking. I consulted my notebook where I'd arranged the suspects in order of apparent motive. Any preferences on the batting order? Begin with Dr. Morrison. Professional rivalry combined with financial loss creates a volatile mixture, then Mr. Brennan. Politicians under pressure are predictable in their unpredictability. Save Dr. Carver for last. Former mentors who have been surpassed by their students require delicate handling. The professional rival, Dr. Janet Morrison. Morrison, Klein and Associates occupied 3 floors of a midtown tower that screamed expensive competence. Dr. Morrison herself was a woman in her early 40s who had clearly learned that in the accounting world, appearance matters almost as much as accuracy. Her handshake was firm, her office was immaculate, and her smile never quite reached her eyes. "Mr. Goodwin," she said, gesturing to a chair that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. "I assume this is about Miranda Kellerman's unfortunate situation." "Unfortunate is one way to put it. Systematic destruction is another." Her smile flickered but held. "Miranda is exceptionally talented, but she's also uncompromising to a fault. In our profession, that can create enemies. Enemies like you. Your firm lost the Meridian contract because of her findings. We lost a client because our audit procedures were inadequate. Miranda was correct to point that out." She opened a folder on her desk. "I've prepared a summary of our interactions over the past 2 years. You'll find them entirely professional. The fact that she had documentation ready before being asked told me more than the documentation itself. Dr. Morrison, who in your firm worked on the Meridian account after Dr. Kellerman left. My junior partner, David Klein, handled the transition. He studied at Oxford, if that's relevant to your inquiry." It was relevant, and the fact that she mentioned it suggested she knew about the British spelling inconsistencies in the anonymous complaints against Dr. Kellerman. "Has Mr. Klein expressed any opinions about Dr. Kellerman's methods?" David appreciates thoroughness, but he believes Miranda sometimes lets perfect be the enemy of good. She closed the folder with finality. "Mr. Goodwin, destroying Miranda wouldn't restore our contract or our reputation. It would simply damage the profession we both serve." The politician under pressure. Thomas Brennan. The city attorney's office occupied several floors of a building that had seen better decades, much like Thomas Brennan himself. He was a big man going soft around the middle, with the kind of politician's smile that had been focus grouped to death. His office walls were covered with photographs of him shaking hands with people who looked important, and his desk was cluttered with campaign materials. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, rising to shake hands with practiced enthusiasm, "I can give you 15 minutes. The campaign keeps me busier than a one-legged cat in a sandbox." "Mr. Brennan, Dr. Kellerman's work has highlighted some deficiencies in your office's investigations. That can't help your re-election prospects." His smile never wavered. "Miranda is thorough, sometimes to a fault. But I've always supported rigorous analysis, even when it reveals areas for improvement. Areas for improvement that make you look incompetent to the voters. Politics is about perception, Mr. Goodwin, but destroying Miranda wouldn't change the facts of those cases." He glanced at his watch. "Besides, I've been entirely focused on my campaign for the past 6 months. Ask my campaign manager. She'll tell you I haven't had time to orchestrate complex schemes against forensic accountants." "Who handled Dr. Kellerman's disclosure forms when she worked for your office?" "My deputy, Sarah Chen. She's meticulous about documentation." He stood, signaling the end of our conversation. "Mr. Goodwin, whoever did this to Miranda had inside knowledge and access to confidential information. That points to someone much closer to her than a politician facing re-election. The vengeful ex-con, Marcus Hartwell. Hartwell had taken an apartment on East 72nd Street, which suggested either hidden assets or family support. The man who answered the door looked like he'd aged a decade in the 18 months since his sentencing. Prison had carved lines around his eyes and added gray to his temples, but his handshake was firm and his gaze direct. "Mr. Goodwin, I've been expecting someone to connect me to Dr. Kellerman's troubles." His voice carried the measured tone of someone who'd learned to choose words carefully. "The timeline doesn't support your theory, but I understand why I'm a suspect." His apartment was spartanly furnished, but immaculately clean, with the kind of institutional order that comes from controlled living. A single photograph on the side table showed him with a woman and 2 children, his family before the fall. "Mr. Hartwell, prison doesn't prevent communication with the outside world." "True, but it severely limits one's ability to access confidential financial records or coordinate complex schemes. He met my eyes steadily. I spent 18 months thinking about Dr. Kellerman and what her testimony cost me. I concluded she was doing her job with exceptional competence. That's remarkably philosophical for someone who lost everything. I lost everything because I was guilty, Mr. Goodwin. Dr. Kellerman simply proved it more thoroughly than I expected. He paused. My sister serves on the advisory board of a logistics consortium that includes Northgate. She mentioned they've been concerned about potential investigations. Perhaps that's relevant to your inquiry. The competitive journalist, Rebecca Sterling. Rebecca Sterling worked out of a converted warehouse in Brooklyn, the kind of space that suggests either artistic sensibility or economic necessity. She was younger than her photograph suggested, with the kind of intensity that comes from spending too much time chasing stories that matter. Mr. Goodwin, she said without preamble, are you here because someone thinks I destroyed Miranda Kellerman's reputation? Did you? She laughed, but there wasn't much humor in it. I've been investigating the same story for 3 months. Someone with serious resources and inside knowledge orchestrated a brilliant campaign to neutralize one of the city's most effective forensic accountants. And you don't think that someone was you? My work depends on sources trusting me with sensitive information. If I started using that information to destroy the people who helped me, I'd be out of business within a month. She gestured to a wall covered with newspaper clippings. Besides, Miranda's work often confirmed my reporting. We were allies, not competitors. Then who's your prime suspect? Someone who knew her work patterns, had access to confidential financial records, and understood exactly how to create the appearance of conflicts of interest. She met my eyes. Someone who taught her those very skills. The bitter mentor, Dr. Michael Carver. In our NYU's accounting department occupied a modern building that managed to look both expensive and institutional. Dr. Carver's office was lined with books, awards, and photographs, showing him with various luminaries of the accounting world. One photograph, prominently displayed, showed him with a younger doctor, Kellerman. He was older than his photograph, probably in his 60s, with the kind of distinguished appearance that comes from decades of academic success. But there was something brittle in his manner, the fragility of a man whose certainties had been challenged. Mr. Goodwin, he said, his voice carrying academic authority, I assume you're here about Miranda's troubles. Dr. Carver, you were Dr. Kellerman's mentor before your falling out 3 years ago. What caused the break? His expression tightened. Professional differences that became personal. Miranda developed an unfortunate tendency to question established methodologies without sufficient consideration for their proven effectiveness. And that was worth ending a professional relationship. Academic integrity requires adherence to established principles. Miranda's increasingly independent approach threatened to undermine years of careful work. He paused. However, I would never use my knowledge of her methods to destroy her reputation. Someone with intimate knowledge of her work patterns orchestrated this campaign. Who else would have that information? Any number of people. Miranda was not secretive about her methods, but his eyes didn't meet mine when he said it. The evening revelation. By the time I returned to the brownstone, Wolfe had positioned himself behind his desk with the air of a general preparing for battle. I gave him a complete account of my interviews, noting the defensive preparations, the pointed suggestions, and the careful non-denials. Each of them pointed me towards someone else, I concluded. Morrison suggested it was someone closer to Dr. Kellerman. Brennan said the same thing. Sterling pointed directly at Carver. Even Hartwell seemed to be suggesting we look at Northgate's concerns. Interesting, Wolfe murmured. A circle of suspects, each deflecting suspicion toward the center. That suggests either remarkable coordination or a common understanding of where the true vulnerability lies. Before he could elaborate, Fritz appeared in the doorway. Mr. Wolfe, Dr. Vance is here with Dr. Kellerman, the client, appears Doctor. Miranda Kellerman entered our office like a woman walking into a courtroom where she expected to be both witness and defendant. She was younger than I'd imagined, probably mid-30s, with the kind of precise movements that come from years of dealing with numbers that have to add up exactly. Her handshake was firm, her gaze direct, and her first words cut straight to the point. Mr. Wolfe, thank you for taking my case. I know the risks you're assuming. Wolfe inclined his head slightly. Dr. Kellerman, you have been methodically destroyed by someone who understood your methods intimately. We must identify that person and their means. She settled into the red leather chair with careful movements. I've brought additional documentation. Financial records showing the timing of each incident and the information that would have been required to create each apparent conflict. She handed Wolfe a thick folder. The pattern is clear once you see it laid out chronologically. Someone had access to confidential information about my past engagements and the ability to time revelations for maximum damage. Dr. Kellerman, Wolfe said, of the 5 individuals we've identified as suspects, which would you consider most capable of orchestrating such a campaign? She was quiet for a long moment, considering. Marcus Hartwell has the motive, but probably lacks the current access. Dr. Morrison has the professional knowledge, but would risk her own reputation. Thomas Brennan has political motivations, but operates too publicly. Rebecca Sterling has the platform, but depends on maintaining source relationships. And Dr. Carver, her expression tightened almost imperceptibly. Michael taught me everything I know about forensic accounting. He knows my methods, my sources, my vulnerabilities. He also has students placed throughout the financial community who could provide information. She paused. But more than that, he has the patience and the ego to enjoy watching me destroyed by the very principles he taught me. Wolfe's assessment. After Dr. Kellerman and Dr. Vance left through the back entrance, Wolfe sat in contemplative silence for several minutes. Finally, he looked up at me with the expression that meant he'd reached preliminary conclusions. Archie, we have established our circle of suspects, each with motive and opportunity. But we have also established something more significant. The campaign against Dr. Kellerman required not just knowledge and access, but coordination. The timing was too precise, the information too specific, for a single actor working alone. You think they're working together? I think one is directing, and others are contributing, perhaps unknowingly. The question is whether they're collaborating or being manipulated. He reached for his beer. Tomorrow you will begin the second phase of investigation. I want to know the specific connections between these individuals and their access to the information used against Dr. Kellerman. And if they are working together, then we will arrange for them to demonstrate that collaboration in circumstances they do not control. His smile was not pleasant. The brownstone has been invaded by lawyers and threatened by surveillance. It is time to reclaim the initiative. Outside, the October night was settling into darkness, and somewhere in the city, someone who had orchestrated a brilliant campaign of destruction was probably sleeping peacefully. But as I watched Wolfe return to his files with the focused intensity of a predator who had found the scent, I knew that peaceful sleep was about to become a luxury none of our suspects could afford. The circle of suspects was complete, and each had revealed just enough to deepen the mystery while pointing toward the center where the real answers lay. Tomorrow would bring the delicate work of determining whether we were hunting one mastermind or a conspiracy of grievances. The game was entering its most dangerous phase. Thursday morning brought the kind of crisp October air that makes even the most suspicious New Yorker believe in fresh starts, which was ironic, considering I was about to spend the day proving that some people never change. Wolfe had finished his morning communion with the orchids and settled behind his desk with the satisfied expression of a man who had spent 2 hours with organisms that never plotted against each other. "Archie," he said, accepting his first beer of the day from Fritz. "Yesterday you observed our suspects in their natural habitats. Today you will trace the flow of information that made Dr. Kellerman's destruction possible. Someone had access to confidential records spanning multiple institutions. That access leaves traces. I consulted my notebook, where I'd organized the day's objectives according to Wolfe's precise instructions. You want me to focus on the plumbing rather than the plumbers." An apt metaphor. Dr. Kellerman's destruction required intimate knowledge of her financial dealings, her work patterns, and her professional vulnerabilities. That information exists in various files and databases. Determine who had access to each source. The surveillance situation. Before heading out, I took a moment to appreciate our morning visitors. The dark sedan had returned to its post across the street like a faithful dog, complete with 2 men who were becoming quite skilled at pretending the dashboard held fascinating secrets. I stepped outside, walked past them with the casual air of a man thinking about baseball scores, and noted the license plate. One call to Lon Cohen at the Gazette got me the usual sigh about favors owed, followed by useful information. "Halcyon Protective Services," he reported. "Midtown office, expensive invoices, and a client list that includes Bennett and Lyle Law Firm and Northgate Logistics directly. You want me to dig deeper?" "Not yet, but keep the shovel handy." So our brownstone was under professional observation by people with clipboards rather than crowbars. Someone was taking our involvement seriously enough to pay for quality surveillance. I filed that information and headed out to trace the more subtle forms of watching that had destroyed Dr. Kellerman. The academic connection. My first stop was Columbia University, where Dr. Vance had agreed to provide access to Dr. Kellerman's academic records. The campus was bustling with students who looked like they'd never worried about paying rent, which reminded me why I'd chosen a profession that didn't require dissertations on subjects I couldn't pronounce. Dr. Vance met me in the faculty lounge, a wood-paneled sanctuary that smelled of old books and fresh anxiety. She looked tired, the kind of exhaustion that comes from fighting battles you're not sure you can win. "Mr. Goodwin," she said, settling into a leather chair that had probably witnessed decades of academic conspiracies. "I've pulled Dr. Kellerman's personnel files and consulting records. The disclosure statements show her complete financial picture going back 5 years. Who has access to those statements? The ethics committee, the department chair, administrative staff, probably 15 people with direct access. But they're also stored in the university database, which means anyone with administrative privileges could access them." She paused meaningfully. Dr. Carver served on the ethics committee until last year. He would have seen every statement Miranda filed. And his graduate students? 3 of them are now working in positions where they'd have access to different pieces of the puzzle. One at Morrison, Klein and Associates, another with the city attorney's office, and the third at Northgate Logistics. The professional network. That last connection warranted immediate investigation. At Morrison, Klein and Associates, I found David Klein in his precisely organized office, surrounded by certificates that announced his qualifications to anyone who might question them. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, his accent carrying just enough British inflection to be noticeable. "Doctor. Morrison mentioned you were investigating Dr. Kellerman's unfortunate situation. Mr. Klein, I understand you collaborated with Dr. Kellerman and Dr. Carver on academic research before her troubles began." His expression shifted almost imperceptibly. We co-authored a paper on algorithmic analysis for conflict identification. Purely theoretical work, you understand. But the methodologies you developed, could they be applied to real-world data? In theory, yes. The algorithms we created could cross-reference seemingly unrelated financial transactions to identify potential conflicts of interest. He paused, choosing his words carefully. Dr. Kellerman was particularly interested in the practical applications. And now, someone appears to be using similar methods against her. The irony is not lost on me, Mr. Goodwin. The very tools we developed to ensure transparency have apparently been weaponized. The municipal connection. At the city attorney's office, Sarah Chen received me with the wariness of someone who had learned to treat confidentiality as a sacred trust. Her office was organized with methodical efficiency that suggested she knew where every document was filed and who had access to each one. Mr. Goodwin, she said, I understand you're investigating how Dr. Kellerman's confidential information became public. The disclosure requirements were followed, but someone seemed to know exactly what to look for and when to look for it. We implemented a new database system 2 years ago after the city's data breach. It cross-references all financial disclosures and conflict statements for easy access during background checks. She produced a file folder. These are the Freedom of Information requests that led to Dr. Kellerman's problems. Properly filed but strategically coordinated. I examined the requests, noting their careful phrasing and precise timing. Who implemented your new system? An outside firm called Secure Data Solutions. Their technician, Mr. Alistair Finch, still provides ongoing maintenance and system audits. The corporate angle Northgate Logistics occupied a gleaming tower that announced its occupants' importance through architectural intimidation. Getting inside required the kind of creative approach I'd perfected over years of asking questions people didn't want to answer. I presented myself as a representative following up on completed consulting work, which got me directed to the accounting department. The department head, a harried man named Peterson, became noticeably more guarded when I mentioned Dr. Kellerman's name. Dr. Kellerman's work for us was completed months ago, he said carefully. We addressed her concerns through proper channels. I understand you have someone from Dr. Carver's program working here. His expression relaxed slightly. Jennifer Walsh, one of our junior analysts. Excellent credentials from NYU. Is she available? Jennifer is on assignment outside the office this week. Perhaps you could call next week. The careful deflection told me more than a direct answer would have. Someone at Northgate was nervous about connections being drawn. The journalistic angle. Rebecca Sterling's Brooklyn warehouse office buzzed with the energy of someone who lived for the next big story. She looked up from her computer with the intensity of a hunter who had caught an interesting scent. Mr. Goodwin, she said, I've been digging since we spoke. The more I look at Kellerman's case, the more it screams inside job. Someone knew her financial history better than she did. Any leads on how they got that knowledge? There's a data analytics firm that's been making inroads with city agencies and large corporations. They promise unprecedented transparency, but they're remarkably good at finding dirt. Secure Data Solutions. You know them. The name was becoming familiar. They came up in another context. What kind of services do they provide? Risk assessment through cross-referencing public financial data with private contractual agreements. They've been very effective at identifying hidden liabilities and potential conflicts of interest. She met my eyes. The same company that secured the city's database also provides similar services to private clients. The pattern emerges. By the time I returned to the brownstone, I had traced a web of connections that was both more complex and more obvious than I'd expected. Wolfe was waiting in his chair, surrounded by files and wearing the expression of a man who had spent the day connecting dots into pictures. Report, he said without preamble. I gave him a complete account, David Klein's collaboration with Kellerman and Carver on algorithmic conflict identification, Sarah Chen's new database system from Secure Data Solutions, the strategic timing of FOIA requests, Jennifer Walsh's convenient absence from Northgate, and Rebecca Sterling's confirmation of Secure Data's reputation for finding problems. The mechanism is clear, I concluded. Someone with access to Secure Data's systems, or knowledge of the algorithms developed by Kellerman, Carver, and Klein. Weaponized Doctor. Kellerman's own work against her. The only person with the motive, knowledge, and connections to coordinate this is Doctor. Carver, using his network of former students. Wolfe leaned back in his chair. So the very tools Dr. Kellerman helped create were turned against her. An intellectually elegant crime, if morally reprehensible. Before I could respond, the phone rang. Dr. Vance's voice was tight with concern. Mr. Goodwin, Dr. Kellerman's apartment was broken into last night. Nothing was taken, but her files were thoroughly searched. The stakes rise. After I relayed the message, Wolfe sat in contemplative silence for several minutes. When he looked up, his expression carried the satisfaction of a chess master who had just seen the winning combination. Archie, call Saul Panzer. We will need his particular talents. For surveillance, for protection and observation. We are about to apply pressure that will force our adversaries to reveal themselves. His smile was predatory. Dr. Kellerman will announce that she has recovered evidence of the conspiracy against her and intends to expose it publicly. We will then observe who takes action to prevent that exposure. And if they take action against Dr. Kellerman, they will take action against what they believe is Dr. Kellerman's evidence. We will ensure that action occurs under circumstances we control. The evening assessment. As darkness settled over the city, I reflected on the day's discoveries. We had identified not just the mechanism of Dr. Kellerman's destruction, but the network that made it possible. Dr. Carver had placed his former students in key positions throughout the city's financial infrastructure, then used their access to orchestrate a campaign that turned Dr. Kellerman's own expertise against her. The men in the sedan across the street adjusted themselves for another night of observation, no doubt reporting our activities to whoever was paying for professional surveillance. But as I watched Wolfe return to his files with the focused intensity of a predator who had found the scent, I knew their employers were about to discover that watching Nero Wolfe was considerably less dangerous than being watched by him. The brownstone's sanctity had been violated by lawyers, threatened by surveillance, and invaded by a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of the city's professional community. But we had traced the connections, identified the mechanism, and were prepared to turn the hunters into the hunted. Tomorrow would bring the delicate work of forcing that conspiracy into the open where it could be observed, documented, and ultimately destroyed. The client who never existed was about to discover just how real her enemies were, and how dangerous it was to underestimate the detective who never left his house. The game was entering its most dangerous phase, and Nero Wolfe was ready to play. Friday morning brought the kind of gray October sky that makes even optimists wonder if their luck is about to run out. I was at my desk, reviewing the web of connections we'd traced the day before, when Fritz appeared in the doorway, wearing an expression I'd seen maybe 3 times in 20 years. The look of a man whose universe had been subtly but unmistakably violated. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, his voice carrying just enough controlled outrage to get my complete attention. "Someone has been in my kitchen. The violation discovered." That statement hit me like a cold slap. Fritz's kitchen was his sanctuary, organized with the precision of a Swiss chronometer and protected with the ferocity of a mother defending her cubs. For someone to penetrate that domain without Fritz knowing it was happening suggested professional skills of the highest order. I followed him to the kitchen where everything appeared normal at first glance. The copper pots hung in perfect alignment, the knives were arranged in order of size and function, and the morning's preparations proceeded on schedule. But Fritz was not a man to imagine disturbances. "Show me," I said. He led me to the spice cabinet, that masterpiece of organization containing ingredients from every corner of the world, each in its designated place according to a system Fritz had perfected over decades of culinary excellence. "The mace," he said, pointing to a small glass jar that looked identical to every other small jar in the collection. "Someone has moved it." I examined the jar, noting that it appeared completely undisturbed. "How can you tell?" "The label faces backward. I always position labels forward for easy identification during cooking. This morning it faced the wall. His expression was grave. Also, there are orange flecks on the threads where the lid meets the glass. Someone unfamiliar with my technique of opening spice jars. The pattern emerges. While Fritz secured the kitchen and checked for other disturbances, I began a methodical inspection of the office. Wolfe's domain showed similar signs of careful but imperfect intrusion. A book on the shelf was pushed in slightly less than flush with its neighbors. The pencil I keep on my desk blotter was missing. I found it under the leg of the red leather visitor's chair with a small dent in the ferrule where someone had stepped on it. But the most significant discovery was the manila envelope I'd left on my desk containing copies of Dr. Kellerman's documentation. The envelope appeared untouched, but when I examined it closely, I could detect the faint smell of rubber cement around the flap, the telltale sign of someone who knew how to lift and reseal an envelope without leaving obvious traces. I opened it carefully and counted the pages. Page 7 was missing, the page that listed David Klein, Jennifer Walsh, and Alistair Finch with their current positions and connections to Dr. Kellerman's cases. Wolfe's response. When Wolfe descended from the plant rooms at 11 o'clock, I was waiting with a report that transformed his usual morning satisfaction into something considerably more dangerous. He listened to Fritz's account and my discoveries with the focused attention he normally reserved for discussions of rare orchids. "Fritz," he said when we'd finished, "you are certain about the mace jar's position?" "As certain as I am that today is Friday, Mr. Wolfe. Someone entered this house and conducted a search with considerable skill, but not quite enough to fool someone who knows every inch of his own kitchen." Wolfe's expression darkened like a storm cloud gathering strength. "The violation of our home transforms this matter from professional disagreement into personal affront." He turned to me. "Archie, inspect the plant rooms. If they violated Fritz's kitchen, they may have presumed to enter my sanctuary as well." The ultimate violation. In the plant rooms, I found what I was looking for and dreading. The Cymbidium insigniae on the third bench had been rotated 90 degrees from its usual position. One of Wolfe's antique silver trowels, normally stored in a leather case, had been carelessly tucked beneath a tray of seedlings. When I reported these findings, Wolfe's face went through a series of expressions that would have been fascinating to watch under different circumstances. The plant rooms were his inner sanctum, the place where he communed with organisms that never lied, cheated, or held grudges. For someone to intrude, there was not just trespass, it was sacrilege. "They were thorough," he said quietly, his voice carrying the kind of controlled fury that makes smart people nervous. "Kitchen, office, plant rooms. A complete intelligence-gathering operation designed to assess what we know and what evidence we possess. Professional work. This wasn't some amateur with a grudge and a set of lock-picks. Indeed, someone with the resources to hire Halcyon Protective Services for surveillance also has access to individuals capable of penetrating our security without triggering alarms." He paused, his fingers drumming once on his desk. "The question is whether this represents escalation or desperation." The strategic response. Before I could offer my assessment, the phone rang. Dr. Vance's voice carried the tight control of someone delivering expected but unwelcome news. Mr. Goodwin, Dr. Kellerman's office at the university was burglarized last night. Campus security found evidence of professional entry, but nothing appears to have been taken. The coordination was obvious and ominous. Someone had decided that simultaneous intelligence gathering was worth the considerable risks involved. After I relayed the message, Wolfe sat in contemplative silence for several minutes. When he spoke, his voice carried the satisfaction of a chess master who had just seen his opponent make a revealing mistake. Archie, our adversaries have demonstrated both their capabilities and their concerns. The simultaneous searches suggest coordination, resources, and urgency. Someone is sufficiently worried about our investigation to authorize considerable risks. Or someone wants to know exactly how much we know before they decide how far to escalate. Precisely. Which means we must control the next phase of escalation ourselves. He reached for the phone. Call Saul Panzer. Tell him to be here at 2 o'clock with his complete assessment of our surveillance situation. Then contact Doctor Vance and arrange for Dr. Kellerman to meet us this afternoon. The trap prepared. Saul arrived at precisely 2 o'clock, carrying himself with the unobtrusive competence that had made him the most effective operative in the city. He was a small man who had perfected the art of being forgettable, which was exactly what made him so effective at remembering everything about everyone else. "Nero," he said, settling into the yellow chair. "I've been watching your watchers. Professional crew, probably ex-law enforcement or military. They're good, but they're not invisible. 2-man teams in 8-hour shifts, complete communication setup, and enough equipment to suggest they're prepared for extended surveillance. Can you neutralize their effectiveness? I can make their job considerably more difficult, but if you want to flush out whoever's directing them, you'll need to give them something they can't ignore." Wolfe's smile was not pleasant. "Dr. Kellerman will announce that she has recovered irrefutable evidence of the conspiracy against her. She will schedule a press conference for Monday morning to present her findings to the media. And you want me to observe who takes action to prevent that press conference. I want you to ensure that anyone who takes such action does so under circumstances that provide clear evidence of their involvement." Wolfe's expression was calculating. "We will create a situation that forces our adversaries to choose between exposure and direct action. Either choice will reveal their identity and methods." The evening reckoning. As darkness settled over the brownstone, I found myself checking the locks and security systems with more attention than usual. The violation of our home had changed the atmosphere, adding an edge of personal danger to what had begun as an intellectual puzzle. Wolfe seemed outwardly unaffected by the heightened tension, reading in his chair with his usual concentration. But I noticed he'd positioned Dr. Kellerman's files within easy reach, and the house felt different, not just invaded, but actively threatened. "No second thoughts?" I asked. "None whatsoever. Our adversaries have escalated beyond professional disagreement into criminal trespass and personal violation. They have forfeited any consideration for their privacy, reputation, or comfort." He looked up from his book. "Archie, they made a critical error when they presumed to enter this house uninvited. They have transformed an intellectual exercise into a personal vendetta." Outside, the surveillance sedan had been joined by a second vehicle, suggesting that our activities had attracted additional attention. But as I watched Wolfe return to his reading with the calm satisfaction of a predator who had found the scent, I knew that our watchers were about to discover the difference between observing Nero Wolfe and being observed by him. The subtle trespass had been the mistake that changed everything. Someone had violated the sanctity of the brownstone, disturbed Fritz's kitchen, invaded Wolfe's plant rooms, and rifled through our files. They had crossed the line from professional opposition into personal affront. Dr. Kellerman's announcement would appear in tomorrow's papers, and by Monday morning, we would know who was desperate enough to risk everything to prevent her from speaking. The client, who never existed, was about to force her enemies into the open, and the detective, who never left his house, was ready to receive them with the full weight of his considerable displeasure. The game had moved beyond intellectual exercise into something far more dangerous and personal. Someone had made the fatal error of bringing the battle to Nero Wolfe's door. They were about to discover what a serious mistake that was. Saturday morning brought the kind of gray October sky that makes even optimists check their insurance policies, which seemed appropriate considering we'd just painted a target on our backs and invited half of New York's professional community to take shots at it. The morning papers carried Dr. Kellerman's announcement with the kind of understated prominence that suggested editors who knew a good story when they saw one. The media reaction. The phone started ringing at 8:30, which told me Lon Cohen had spotted our little announcement in the early edition. His voice carried the mixture of professional excitement and personal irritation that meant he smelled a big story, but couldn't get the details. "Archie," he said without preamble, "what's this about Kellerman having irrefutable evidence of a systematic conspiracy?" My sources are going crazy. Northgate's legal team is having emergency meetings, and even the city attorney's office is suddenly very interested in reviewing her past work. Lon, Mr. Wolfe, is always interested in intellectual justice. As for details, you'll have to wait for Monday's press conference. Don't give me that professional discretion nonsense, Goodwin. This is big. Marcus Hartwell's lawyer is already making noises about defamation suits. Dr. Morrison's firm issued a statement about unfounded allegations. Even Rebecca Sterling called asking if I knew what Kellerman had on her sources. This was exactly the kind of ripple effect Wolfe had intended. The announcement, carefully crafted by Dr. Vance and released through reputable channels, was designed to force our adversaries into revealing themselves through their reactions. The legal pressure. At 9:15, the phone rang again with the insistent tone that suggested expensive legal trouble. Thomas Brennan's voice carried the controlled urgency of a politician who had just discovered his carefully constructed world was about to be examined under a microscope. "Mr. Goodwin, I need to speak with Mr. Wolfe immediately. This morning's announcement creates serious complications for ongoing federal investigations." I signaled Wolfe, who took the phone with the expression of a man expecting to hear something illuminating. "Mr. Brennan," he said in his most formal tone, "explain these complications." "Mr. Wolfe, there's a federal task force investigating municipal corruption that's been operating quietly for 6 months. If Dr. Kellerman releases certain information prematurely, it could compromise cases that have taken years to develop. I'm asking you to consider the broader implications. Mr. Brennan, if federal investigators are concerned about Dr. Kellerman's revelations, they may contact her directly through proper channels. I am not in the business of suppressing evidence to accommodate prosecutorial convenience." "Mr. Wolfe, you don't understand the delicate balance. I understand that you are the third person this morning to suggest that Dr. Kellerman's evidence should remain hidden for the greater good. That suggests her evidence is more damaging than I initially calculated." "Good day, Mr. Brennan," the corporate response. 10 minutes later, Mr. Hyatt from Bennett and Lyle called with the kind of carefully modulated threat that expensive lawyers use when they want to sound reasonable while promising destruction. "Mr. Wolfe, my clients are prepared to seek emergency injunctive relief to prevent Monday's press conference. Dr. Kellerman signed comprehensive non-disclosure agreements that preclude public disclosure of confidential information. Mr. Hyatt, your clients may petition whatever court they choose. Dr. Kellerman will present her evidence as scheduled. Mr. Wolfe, we have documentation proving breach of contract. Any public statement could expose her to substantial damages and criminal prosecution for theft of trade secrets. Then your clients should be prepared to defend those agreements in court, where their legitimacy and scope can be properly evaluated. I look forward to examining the circumstances under which Dr. Kellerman was induced to sign such comprehensive restrictions. The line went dead with the abruptness that suggested Hyatt had just realized his threat contained an admission. Saul's intelligence. At 11 o'clock, Saul Panza arrived with the kind of information that transforms speculation into certainty. He settled into the yellow chair with the satisfied expression of a hunter who had spent a productive morning tracking his quarry. "Nero," he said, "your announcement has created considerable activity." The surveillance team received 3 separate sets of instructions this morning, all contradicting each other. Someone's coordination is breaking down under pressure. Describe the activity. First, at 8:30, they were told to maintain passive observation only. At 10:15, new instructions came to document all visitors and prepare detailed reports. At 11:30, a third directive ordered them to prepare for active intervention if circumstances warrant. Saul paused meaningfully. 3 different communication protocols, suggesting 3 different sources of authority. The team leader is confused about which orders to follow. Excellent. The conspiracy is fracturing under pressure. What else? David Klein left Morrison, Klein and Associates at 10:45 with a briefcase and met someone in a black sedan 2 blocks away. The conversation was heated. Lots of gesturing and raised voices. Also, Jennifer Walsh from Northgate was observed entering the secure Data Solutions building at 9:30 and remaining for over an hour. The direct confrontation. At noon, Fritz appeared in the doorway with the expression that meant unwelcome visitors had arrived without invitation. "Mr. Wolfe, Dr. Carver to see you. He says it's urgent." Dr. Carver entered our office like a man walking into a courtroom where he expected to be both prosecutor and defendant. His usual academic composure was strained, replaced by the kind of tightly wound agitation that comes from watching carefully laid plans begin to unravel. "Mr. Wolfe," he began without preamble, "this press conference is a grave mistake. Dr. Kellerman is about to destroy what remains of her credibility and damage the entire profession in the process." Wolfe observed him with the detached interest of a scientist examining a particularly interesting specimen. "Dr. Carver, are you suggesting, Doctor, Kellerman's evidence is fabricated?" "I'm suggesting her interpretation of complex financial relationships is flawed. Miranda is brilliant, but brilliance without proper guidance can lead to dangerous overreaching." He fidgeted with his tie, a gesture I'd never seen from him before. "I'm here as a concerned former mentor, trying to prevent a public spectacle." "Your concern is noted. However, Doctor, Kellerman has retained my services to ensure her interpretation receives a fair hearing. Perhaps you would care to present your counter-arguments at the press conference." Carver's face flushed. "That's preposterous. I'm not involved in this vendetta. I simply want to prevent professional embarrassment for everyone involved." "Indeed. Yet you are the first of our identified suspects to appear at my door, uninvited, to express concern about evidence you claim not to have seen." Wolfe's gaze was unwavering. "Your agitation, Doctor. Carver suggests a personal stake beyond that of a concerned colleague. I've said what I came to say. You're making a terrible mistake." He left more in retreat than departure. The planted evidence. That afternoon brought a different kind of pressure. An unmarked envelope arrived by courier containing a photograph of Dr. Kellerman meeting with a man I recognized as a minor figure in the city's organized crime network. The photo was old, grainy, and completely without context, a classic smear tactic designed to create maximum damage with minimum substance. "Someone's getting desperate," I observed, showing Wolfe the photograph. He examined it with his magnifying glass. The quality suggests multiple reproductions. The angle implies surreptitious photography. Most significantly, the timing suggests someone who believes this flimsy artifact will be sufficient to derail Dr. Kellerman's efforts. It points to someone with access to old intelligence files, but limited current resources. Precisely. And someone who underestimates both Dr. Kellerman's resolve and my thoroughness. This amateurish attempt reveals more about its source than its target. The physical threat. That evening brought the kind of direct action we'd been expecting. I was reviewing the day's developments when Fritz appeared with controlled urgency. "Mr. Goodwin, someone is attempting to enter through the service door." The security panel showed activity at the rear entrance. Patient, professional work that suggested someone with considerable skill. But before I could reach Wolfe's gun, the activity stopped. Whoever had been testing our defenses had apparently decided that discretion was preferable to confrontation. Wolfe's strategic response. When I reported the attempted break-in, Wolfe's expression moved through calculation before settling on something predatory. "Archie, call Inspector Kramer, report the attempted break-in and request increased patrol coverage, then contact Dr. Kellerman and inform her that security considerations require postponing her press conference until Tuesday." Why the delay? Because our adversaries are operating under time pressure that makes them predictable. By extending their anxiety, we increase the likelihood they will make errors that reveal their identity and methods. He reached for the phone. Also, arrange for Monday morning coverage of the postponement due to security concerns. Make certain the story mentions that Dr. Kellerman has placed her evidence in a secure location pending Tuesday's revelation. The evening assessment. As darkness settled over the brownstone, I reflected on the day's revelations. The increased pressure had worked exactly as Wolfe intended, forcing multiple parties to reveal their involvement through their reactions. The phone calls, surveillance escalation, planted evidence, and attempted break-in all pointed to a conspiracy that was both larger and more fragmented than we'd initially suspected. "The coordination is breaking down," I observed. 3 different sets of instructions to the surveillance team, contradictory legal strategies, and amateur hour smear tactics suggest someone is losing control of their network. Precisely, Archie. Dr. Carver's direct appearance was particularly revealing. A man confident in his position would have remained aloof. His agitation suggests he recognizes that his carefully constructed campaign is unraveling. Outside, the surveillance sedan had been joined by a police patrol car, providing visible evidence that the brownstone was now under official protection. But as I watched Wolfe return to his evening reading with calm satisfaction, I knew our real protection came from something more dangerous than police patrols. The increased pressure had served its purpose, forcing the hidden conspiracy into increasingly desperate actions that revealed both its scope and its vulnerabilities. Dr. Kellerman's delayed announcement would appear in Monday's papers, creating additional anxiety for those who had orchestrated her destruction. By Tuesday morning, we would know who was desperate enough to risk everything to prevent her from speaking. The client, who never existed, had succeeded in drawing her enemies into the open, and the detective, who never left his house, was ready to receive them with the full weight of his considerable displeasure. The game was approaching its climax, and someone was about to discover that violating the sanctity of the brownstone was a mistake that could neither be forgiven nor forgotten. Sunday morning brought the kind of crisp October air that makes even cynics believe in fresh starts, which seemed ironically appropriate considering we were about to demonstrate that some fresh starts require burning down what came before. Wolfe descended from the plant rooms at precisely 11 o'clock, carrying himself with the controlled satisfaction of a man who had spent 2 hours with organisms that never violated anyone's home. "Archie," he said, accepting his first beer with deliberate ceremony. Our adversaries revealed themselves through their reactions to pressure. Today we stop allowing them to choose the terrain of engagement. I consulted my notebook, where I'd organized the previous day's intelligence according to Wolfe's precise instructions. The postponement announcement should be creating additional anxiety about now. More than anxiety. It provides them time to make the kind of desperate decisions that expose both methods and coordination. His eyes held the cold satisfaction of a man whose kitchen had been violated and whose plant rooms had been searched. They presume to enter this house uninvited, Archie. That transgression requires a response that ensures it will not be repeated. The canary trap. Wolfe outlined his strategy with the methodical precision of a chess master explaining a complex endgame. We would create 3 separate fictional locations where Dr. Kellerman's evidence was supposedly secured, each with unique identifying details. By controlling who received which version, we could trace any subsequent action back to its source. The principle is simple, he explained. Each suspect will receive information about a different secure location. Anyone who acts on that information reveals themselves as either the perpetrator or an active collaborator. And if they don't take the bait, then we will have eliminated them from suspicion and can focus our attention elsewhere. He reached for his beer. But they will take the bait, Archie. The systematic destruction of Dr. Kellerman required access to confidential information. Anyone capable of such access will be unable to resist verifying what they believe to be her evidence against them. The strategic leaks. At noon, I began implementing Wolfe's carefully orchestrated information campaign. My first call was to Lon Cohen, whose journalistic instincts made him an ideal conduit for strategic leaks. Lon, I said, Mr. Wolfe's investigation has uncovered evidence of a sophisticated data analytics firm being used to manipulate public perception through selective disclosure of confidential information. The firm has academic connections and appears to have been weaponizing research methodologies for unethical purposes. Academic connections. You're talking about secure data solutions and their relationship with university researchers. I'm talking about the systematic abuse of intellectual work to destroy professional reputations. The methods are brilliant, technically legal, and morally corrupt. This was exactly the kind of story Lon couldn't resist, and within an hour, I knew the information would be circulating through the city's media networks, creating additional pressure on anyone connected to Secure Data's operations. The false locations. By 2 o'clock, I had established our 3 fictional secure locations with the help of Saul Panzer's extensive network of contacts. Each location was plausible, verifiable to a point, and contained enough authentic details to pass casual investigation. Location A was a safe deposit box at Midtown Trust under the alias Anselm Maury, supposedly containing Dr. Kellerman's complete algorithmic analysis of the conspiracy. This information would reach Dr. Carver through his former student at Secure Data Solutions. Location B was a climate-controlled storage facility in Long Island City, rented under Dr. Vance's name and allegedly containing physical documentation of the data manipulation. This version would be leaked to Northgate Logistics through their legal representatives. Location C was a legal escrow arrangement with Farley and Reeves, attorneys, supposedly protecting Dr. Kellerman's evidence until Tuesday's press conference. This information would reach Morrison, Klein and Associates through David Klein's academic connections. The pressure campaign. While Saul positioned our surveillance assets to monitor each location, I began the delicate work of delivering our strategic misinformation, my visit to Dr. Carver's office was particularly satisfying, given his violation of our home. Dr. Carver, I said, settling into his office with the casual air of a man discussing the weather. Mr. Wolfe thought you should be aware that Dr. Kellerman's evidence includes detailed analysis of the algorithmic methods used against her. The complete documentation is secured at Midtown Trust under appropriate safeguards. His reaction was everything Wolfe had predicted. The mention of algorithmic methods caused a barely perceptible tightening around his eyes, and when I casually mentioned the Anselm Maury alias, he made me repeat it twice before pretending to lose interest. The network fractures. By evening, Our strategic pressure was producing the desired results. Saul's reports indicated increasing agitation among our suspects, with multiple urgent phone calls and hastily arranged meetings. Dr. Morrison called David Klein into her office for what sounded like a heated discussion about academic integrity and not being dragged into this mess, Saul reported. Jennifer Walsh left Northgate in a hurry and went straight to Dr. Carver's office. The conversation lasted 40 minutes and involved considerable shouting. "Excellent," Wolfe murmured. "The conspiracy is fracturing under pressure. When thieves fall out, honest men come by their own." The official complications, Inspector Kramer's arrival at 6 o'clock, brought the kind of official pressure that confirmed our strategy was working. He settled into the yellow chair with the expression of a man who had been receiving uncomfortable phone calls from important people. "Wolfe," he said without preamble, "what kind of hornet's nest have you kicked this time? I've got federal agencies asking questions, the mayor's office expressing concerns, and the district attorney requesting files on cases that were closed years ago. Inspector, we are investigating the systematic destruction of a professional reputation through methods that were technically legal, but morally corrupt. The official interest suggests our investigation has identified matters of broader significance. The official interest suggests you've scared some very important people. The kind of people who have resources to make life difficult for anyone who gets in their way." Kramer's expression was grim. "Someone broke into your house, Wolfe. Next time, they might not be satisfied with searching your files. Inspector, I appreciate your concern. However, the violation of this house transformed a professional disagreement into a personal matter. I do not retreat from personal matters." The evening assessment. As darkness settled over the brownstone, I found Wolfe in his chair, surrounded by reports from our various surveillance operations. The satisfaction in his expression suggested that events were proceeding exactly as he had anticipated. "The positioning is complete," he said, looking up from Saul's latest intelligence summary. "Dr. Carver has been identified as the architect of the conspiracy. His network of former students has been exposed, and the coordination between academic, corporate, and governmental interests has been documented. And tomorrow, we will observe which of our false locations attracts unwelcome attention, thereby identifying the specific individuals who possess inside information about Dr. Kellerman's supposed evidence." He set down his beer with finality. "By Tuesday morning, we will know not only who orchestrated her destruction, but who among our suspects is actively collaborating in the cover-up." Outside, the surveillance teams had multiplied until the street resembled a poorly organized convention of people trying to look inconspicuous. But as I watched Wolfe return to his evening reading with calm satisfaction, I knew that our watchers were about to discover the difference between observing Nero Wolfe and being maneuvered by him. The canary trap was set, the pressure campaign was in motion, and the conspiracy was fracturing under the weight of its own contradictions. The client, who never existed, had succeeded in drawing her enemies into a carefully constructed maze where every path led to exposure. Dr. Carver and his collaborators had violated the sanctity of the brownstone, disturbed Fritz's kitchen, and invaded Wolfe's plant rooms. They had transformed an intellectual exercise into a personal vendetta, and Nero Wolfe was about to demonstrate why that was a mistake they would never have the opportunity to repeat. The positioning was complete. The trap was baited. Tomorrow would reveal who was desperate enough to take action, and Tuesday would bring the Isai, reckoning they had made inevitable through their own arrogance and greed. The game was approaching its climax, and Wolfe was ready to play his final hand. Monday evening brought the kind of October chill that makes even the most confident New Yorkers check their locks twice, which seemed appropriate considering we were about to demonstrate that some locks are psychological rather than physical. The day's surveillance had produced exactly the results Wolfe anticipated. Desperate action that revealed both identity and method with the precision of a well-executed experiment. The Canary Trap Springs. Saul's afternoon report read like a textbook on criminal coordination under pressure. At 9:30 that morning, Jennifer Walsh from Northgate had appeared at the Long Island City storage facility armed with what appeared to be legitimate credentials and a story about retrieving materials for legal proceedings. The facility manager, properly briefed by our preparations, had politely informed her that the unit was under litigation hold and could not be accessed. She left nervous, Saul reported with satisfaction, but not before asking specific questions about climate control and document preservation that matched exactly what you told them about Dr. Vance's supposed storage arrangements. At 11:15, David Klein had visited Midtown Trust, presenting himself as Dr. Kellerman's authorized representative seeking access to the Anselm Morey safe deposit box. The bank's security officer, alerted by our preparations, had requested additional documentation. Klein's subsequent phone call from the sidewalk had been animated enough to attract attention from pedestrians. Most significantly, at 2 o'clock, Dr. Carver himself had contacted Farley and Reeves about the supposed escrow arrangement, identifying himself as Dr. Kellerman's academic supervisor with authority to review the documentation. The law firm's receptionist had carefully noted his exact words. The escrow, per the holdback clause appended to Exhibit C of the engagement letter, phrasing that had appeared in no public document but had been delivered specifically to him through his network. Each acted on the information they received, Wolfe observed, with the satisfaction of a chess master watching his opponent walk into checkmate. The coordination confirms our assessment. Dr. Carver orchestrating, his former students executing, and the entire network operating with the desperate efficiency that comes from shared guilt. The assembly. At precisely 6 o'clock, Fritz began ushering in our reluctant guests. The arrangement was carefully choreographed, chairs positioned in a semicircle facing Wolfe's desk, each suspect aware of the others but uncertain about their individual exposure. Dr. Michael Carver entered first, carrying himself with the rigid dignity of a man who had spent his career in positions of authority and was struggling to adjust to circumstances beyond his control. His usual academic composure showed cracks around the edges, the kind of strain that comes from watching carefully laid plans begin to unravel. Dr. Janet Morrison followed, maintaining her professional bearing, but unable to completely mask her awareness that the situation had moved beyond her expertise. Her frequent glances at the others revealed calculations about damage control and legal exposure. Thomas Brennan arrived with the false confidence of a politician who believed charm could overcome evidence, but the perspiration on his forehead betrayed his anxiety. His practiced smile had developed a nervous tic. Marcus Hartwell appeared genuinely puzzled by his inclusion in the group, carrying himself with the calm resignation of a man who had seen worse and had nothing left to lose. That made him dangerous in a different way. He had no reputation left to protect. Rebecca Sterling was the only one who seemed comfortable with the tension, her journalistic instincts recognizing the story unfolding around her. She carried a small notebook, ready to document proceedings she couldn't yet publish, but clearly relished witnessing. Wolfe's opening gambit. Wolfe surveyed his assembled guests with the satisfaction of a man who had successfully maneuvered his opponents into a position of his choosing. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of someone presenting conclusions rather than theories. Ladies and gentlemen, you are here because each of you played a role in the systematic destruction of Dr. Miranda Kellerman's professional reputation. Some of you were active participants, others unwitting accomplices, and at least one of you was a victim of the same methods used against Dr. Kellerman. He paused, allowing the implications to settle like dust in sunlight. The campaign against Dr. Kellerman was brilliant in its conception and ruthless in its execution. It required intimate knowledge of forensic accounting methodologies, access to confidential databases across multiple institutions, and the ability to coordinate information with precise timing. Most significantly, it weaponized Dr. Kellerman's own expertise against her. Dr. Carver shifted uncomfortably but maintained his academic mask of polite attention. The methods employed created the appearance of conflicts of interest through selective disclosure of legitimate but unrelated financial transactions. Each revelation was technically accurate, properly documented, and completely misleading. The timing was precise, the information was confidential, and the damage was devastating. The network exposed. Wolfe opened the first folder on his desk, revealing photographs and documentation that Saul's investigation had assembled with methodical thoroughness. Dr. Carver, over the past 5 years, you have placed former students in key positions throughout the city's financial infrastructure. Jennifer Walsh at Northgate Logistics, David Klein at Morrison, Klein and Associates, and Alistair Finch at Secure Data Solutions. Each provided access to the confidential information required to orchestrate Dr. Kellerman's destruction. Carver's academic composure finally showed its first crack. That's preposterous. I had no involvement in any campaign against Miranda. My students' career placements were based entirely on merit and professional opportunity. Indeed, they were. Merit that included their willingness to provide confidential information when requested by their former mentor, and professional opportunity that placed them where such information would be most valuable. Wolfe's gaze was unwavering. The algorithmic analysis you developed with Dr. Kellerman and Mr. Klein was systematically weaponized through Secure Data Solutions database access. Your students provided the raw material, and you provided the methodology to transform legitimate transactions into apparent conflicts of interest. The canary trap. Revealed. Wolfe leaned forward slightly, his voice taking on the tone of a professor delivering a particularly important lesson. Yesterday, I provided each of you with specific, unique information regarding the secure locations of Dr. Kellerman's supposed evidence. This evidence, I informed you through various channels, documented the precise mechanisms and individuals involved in her destruction. The room went very still. Dr. Carver, you were informed through your connection at Secure Data Solutions that Dr. Kellerman's complete algorithmic analysis was secured at Midtown Trust under the alias Anselm Morey. This morning, David Klein attempted to access a safe deposit box at that location using credentials that could only have been obtained through information provided specifically to your network. Carver's face went ashen, but he remained silent. Dr. Morrison, your firm received information that physical documentation was stored at a climate-controlled facility in Long Island City. Jennifer Walsh's attempt to access that facility using forged Northgate credentials demonstrates the coordination between your organizations. Morrison's professional composure finally cracked. We had no knowledge of any conspiracy. David's activities were presented as legitimate research until you became aware of their true purpose and chose to protect your firm's interests rather than report the violations. Wolfe's tone was implacable. Mr. Brennan, your office was informed that Dr. Kellerman's evidence was protected by legal escrow arrangements. Dr. Carver's direct contact with the law firm, using phrasing that appeared only in the information provided to your office, demonstrates the flow of confidential information through official channels. The motive revealed. Wolfe turned to a second folder containing academic correspondence and financial records that revealed the deeper motivations behind the conspiracy. Dr. Carver, you're falling out with Dr. Kellerman 3 years ago was not merely about methodological differences. She had discovered that you were using university resources to provide consulting services to private clients without proper disclosure. Her threat to report your violations to the Ethics Committee prompted your resignation from that body and your subsequent campaign to destroy her credibility before she could destroy yours. The room was silent, except for the sound of carefully controlled breathing. You recognize that Dr. Kellerman's reputation for thoroughness and integrity made her a permanent threat to anyone engaged in questionable practices. By destroying that reputation, you protected not only yourself, but your network of former students who had learned to blur ethical boundaries under your guidance. The web unravels. Wolfe's attention shifted methodically to each suspect, dismantling their defenses with surgical precision. Mr. Hartwell, your inclusion in this gathering serves a different purpose. You are not a perpetrator, but a victim. The same methods later used against Dr. Kellerman were employed to enhance the case against you. Your prosecution was legitimate, but the thoroughness of the evidence was artificially augmented through algorithmic analysis that ensured Dr. Kellerman's testimony would be unassailable. Hartwell's expression showed dawning comprehension. You're saying they used these methods to make sure I was convicted? I'm saying they used these methods to ensure that your conviction was so comprehensive that Dr. Kellerman's role in it would enhance her reputation for thoroughness, a reputation they later destroyed when it became inconvenient to their other activities. Rebecca Sterling had been taking notes throughout, her journalistic instincts recognizing the broader implications. This goes beyond Dr. Kellerman's case, doesn't it? Miss Sterling, your investigation attracted federal attention because the conspiracy involved systematic abuse of government databases and manipulation of legal processes for private gain. The network Dr. Carver created has been providing similar services to other clients with similar results. The destruction of professional reputations has become a profitable enterprise disguised as academic research. The final confrontation. Wolfe opened his final folder, revealing comprehensive documentation assembled through weeks of methodical investigation. The evidence includes financial records showing payments from Northgate Logistics to secure data solutions for risk assessment services that coincided precisely with the campaign against Dr. Kellerman. Communication records between Dr. Carver and his former students. Database access logs showing unauthorized queries of confidential information. And most significantly, Jennifer Walsh's cooperation with federal agents who arrested her this afternoon. The room erupted in simultaneous protests, denials, and demands for legal representation. But Wolfe continued with implacable calm. Miss Walsh's cooperation has provided detailed documentation of the conspiracies, operations, including specific instructions she received from Dr. Carver and the information she was required to provide to secure data solutions. Dr. Carver finally abandoned his academic composure entirely. You have no proof of criminal activity. Academic collaboration and risk assessment are perfectly legal. Indeed they are. But conspiracy to manipulate government databases, unauthorized access to confidential information, and systematic destruction of professional reputations through fraudulent means are not. Wolfe's smile was cold as winter moonlight. You also presume to violate the sanctity of my home in pursuit of your criminal objectives. Justice served. As the implications became clear, the careful facade of academic and professional respectability crumbled like a house of cards in a hurricane. The coordination was breaking down under pressure, each participant recognizing the extent of their exposure and the futility of continued denial. Dr. Carver, Wolfe said with finality, you violated the fundamental principles of academic integrity, abused the trust of your students, orchestrated the destruction of a colleague's reputation to protect your own unethical practices, and presumed to search my kitchen, my office, and my plant rooms in pursuit of information you had no right to possess. The violation of the brownstone's sanctity had transformed an intellectual exercise into a personal vendetta, and Nero Wolfe's vendettas were not affairs to be taken lightly. Inspector Kramer, who had been observing from the yellow chair with the patience of a man who had learned to let Wolfe finish his presentations, finally spoke. "Wolfe, I'll need those federal contacts. This is bigger than municipal corruption. You shall have them, Mr. Kramer. Federal investigators have been monitoring this situation for months. They were simply waiting for someone to provide the intellectual framework that connected all the pieces. The office gathering was dissolving into chaos as each participant recognized that their carefully constructed world was collapsing around them. The client, who never existed, had succeeded in exposing the network that had destroyed her professional life, and the detective, who never left his house, had orchestrated their downfall with the precision of a master chess player executing an inevitable checkmate. As Fritz began showing the shattered conspirators to the door, Wolfe settled back in his chair with the satisfied expression of a man who had successfully defended his home, his principles, and his client's honor. The violation of the brownstone sanctity had been answered with the full weight of intellectual justice and legal consequence. The game was over, and Nero Wolfe had won. Tuesday morning brought the kind of crisp October air that makes even the most cynical New Yorkers believe in justice, which seemed appropriate considering we were about to demonstrate that some victories require patience, precision, and the willingness to let your enemies destroy themselves through their own arrogance. Wolfe descended from the plant rooms at precisely 11 o'clock, carrying himself with the controlled satisfaction of a man who had spent 2 hours with organisms that never violated anyone's home. The final assembly. By noon, our office had transformed into something between a courtroom and a theater, with all the principal players arranged in a careful semicircle facing Wolfe's desk. Dr. Carver sat with the rigid dignity of a man clinging to the last shreds of academic authority. Dr. Morrison maintained her professional composure, though her frequent glances at the others revealed calculations about damage control. Thomas Brennan wore his politician's smile like armor, but the perspiration on his forehead betrayed his anxiety. Marcus Hartwell appeared genuinely puzzled by his inclusion, carrying himself with the calm resignation of a man who had already lost everything. Rebecca Sterling was the only one who seemed comfortable, her journalistic instincts recognizing the story unfolding around her. Inspector Kramer occupied the yellow chair with the patience of a man who had learned to let Wolfe finish his presentations, while Dr. Vance sat quietly near the door, her eyes fixed on Wolfe with a mixture of hope and apprehension. Wolfe's methodical exposition. When Wolfe finally spoke, his voice carried the authority of someone presenting conclusions rather than theories. Ladies and gentlemen, you are here because each of you played a role in the systematic destruction of Dr. Miranda Kellerman's professional reputation. I will present my findings in 5 parts: the method, the means, the motive, the instruments, and the trespass. He paused, allowing the implications to settle like dust in sunlight. The method was brilliant in its simplicity and ruthless in its execution. Dr. Kellerman's reputation was destroyed not through fabrication, but through the selective presentation of legitimate information in the most damaging possible context. Each revelation was technically accurate, properly documented, and completely misleading. Dr. Carver shifted uncomfortably but maintained his academic mask of polite attention. The means required 3 essential elements: access to confidential financial databases, intimate knowledge of Dr. Kellerman's professional methodologies, and the ability to coordinate information with precise timing. This was achieved through a network of former students strategically placed throughout the city's financial infrastructure. The network. Exposed, Wolfe opened the first folder on his desk, revealing photographs and documentation that painted a picture of systematic coordination. Dr. Carver, over the past 5 years, you have placed former students in key positions. Jennifer Walsh at Northgate Logistics provided access to private corporate data. David Klein at Morrison Klein and Associates supplied both information and the theoretical framework. You had developed, together with Dr. Kellerman, Alistair Finch at Secure Data Solutions provided access to the city's cross-referencing database system. And within the city attorney's office, Evan Merrick facilitated the precisely timed public records requests that created each apparent conflict. The room went very still as the scope of the conspiracy became clear. The algorithmic analysis you developed with Dr. Kellerman and Mr. Klein, ostensibly for identifying legitimate conflicts of interest, was systematically weaponized through Secure Data Solutions database access. The very tools created to ensure transparency were turned into instruments of destruction. The motive revealed. Wolfe's gaze moved to Dr. Carver with surgical precision. Your motive was layered, Doctor. Carver. On the surface lay professional jealousy, your inability to accept that your former student had surpassed you in both competence and reputation. Beneath that lay financial self-interest. Northgate Logistics and other clients paid substantial fees for risk assessment services that conveniently neutralized threats to their operations. Carver's academic composure finally showed its first crack. That's preposterous. I had no involvement in any campaign against Miranda. At the core, Wolfe continued implacably, lay fear. Dr. Kellerman had discovered your undisclosed consulting arrangements, your use of university resources for private gain, and your systematic abuse of academic position for personal profit. Her threat to expose these violations prompted your resignation from the Ethics Committee and your subsequent campaign to destroy her credibility before she could destroy yours. The evidence presented, Wolfe opened a second folder, revealing comprehensive documentation assembled through weeks of methodical investigation. The evidence includes financial records showing payments from Northgate to Secure Data for services that coincided precisely with attacks on Dr. Kellerman, communication logs between you and your former students, database access records showing unauthorized queries of confidential information. He paused for effect. Most significantly, we have Jennifer Walsh's complete cooperation with federal agents, including detailed documentation of the instructions she received from you and the information she was required to provide. The room erupted in protests and denials, but Wolfe's voice cut through the chaos with implacable calm. The canary trap revealed. Yesterday, I provided each suspect with specific, unique information regarding the supposed location of Dr. Kellerman's evidence. Dr. Carver, you were informed through your secure data connection that her algorithmic analysis was secured at Midtown Trust under the alias Anselm Maury. This morning, David Klein attempted to access that non-existent safe deposit box. Klein went pale, but Wolfe continued relentlessly. Dr. Morrison, your firm received information about a storage facility in Long Island City. Jennifer Walsh's attempt to access that facility using forged credentials demonstrates the coordination between your organizations. Mr. Brennan, your office was informed about legal escrow arrangements. Dr. Carver's subsequent contact with the law firm, using phrasing that appeared only in information provided to your office, proves the flow of confidential information through official channels. The personal violation. Wolfe's tone shifted, taking on the cold edge that appeared when discussing violations of the brownstone's sanctity. Finally, the trespass. 3 nights ago, someone entered this house and conducted a search of my kitchen, my office, and my plant rooms. Fritz discovered that his mace jar had been moved. I found that my orchids had been disturbed and my tools mishandled. His voice carried the kind of controlled fury that makes smart people nervous. Mr. Alistair Finch of Secure Data Solutions, formerly of the 3rd Signal Battalion at Fort Gordon, used his military training in surreptitious entry to violate the sanctity of my home. His footprints are documented, his methods are recorded, and his presence is confirmed by security footage and forensic evidence. The weight of accumulated evidence was crushing. Even Carver's academic arrogance couldn't withstand the methodical presentation of his crimes. Justice delivered. Inspector Kramer finally stood, his presence transforming the room's atmosphere from academic debate to criminal proceeding. Michael Carver, you're under arrest on federal charges of conspiracy, unauthorized access to government databases, wire fraud, and obstruction of justice. As federal agents appeared to take Carver into custody, Wolfe delivered his final assessment. Dr. Carver, you violated the fundamental principles of academic integrity, abused the trust of your students, orchestrated the destruction of a colleague's reputation to protect your own unethical practices, and presumed to search my home in pursuit of information you had no right to possess. The restoration, as the shattered conspiracy was led away in handcuffs, Dr. Kellerman entered the office for the first time since the case began. She looked like a woman who had spent months carrying a weight she could finally set down. "Mr. Wolfe," she said, her voice carrying both gratitude and wonder, "the university has already contacted me about resuming my position. The federal task force wants me to review similar cases across the country. My reputation hasn't just been restored, it's been enhanced." Wolfe inclined his head with satisfaction. "Dr. Kellerman, justice has been served with appropriate precision. Your expertise will now be recognized at the federal level. Your methodologies will be protected from misuse, and your reputation will serve as a beacon for ethical practice in your profession." The philosophical close. As evening settled over the brownstone, I found Wolfe in his chair, surrounded by the detritus of a successfully concluded case. The files were being packed away, the evidence had been turned over to federal authorities, and the house was returning to its usual rhythm. "Any regrets?" I asked, settling into my own chair with the satisfaction of a job well done. "None whatsoever, Archie." We began with a client who claimed not to exist, pursuing a crime that appeared not to be illegal against perpetrators who seemed to operate within legal boundaries. He raised his beer in a gesture that might have been a toast. We ended with federal arrests, a criminal conspiracy exposed, and the sanctity of this house restored. And Dr. Carver will spend considerable time in federal prison contemplating the intellectual arrogance that led him to believe he could violate fundamental principles without consequence. His students will face similar contemplation regarding their willingness to abuse positions of trust for personal advancement. Fritz appeared in the doorway to announce dinner, his kitchen restored to its proper order, his mace jar returned to its rightful position. The brownstone's sanctity had been violated, but it had been avenged with the full weight of intellectual justice and legal consequence. The final word. As we prepared to go to table, Wolfe offered his concluding observation. "Archie, they presumed to turn Fritz's mace jar, disturb my orchids, and rifle through our files. Such presumption required a response that ensured it would not be repeated." "High treason," I said. "Worse," he replied, his eyes holding the cold satisfaction of complete victory. "Bad manners." The client, who never existed, had gotten her justice. The detective who never left his house had defended his domain, and the conspiracy that had seemed so clever had been dismantled with the precision of a master chess player executing an inevitable checkmate. The brownstone was secure, the case was closed, and Nero Wolfe had once again proven that some violations cannot be tolerated, forgiven, or forgotten. We went to table, victorious. Wednesday morning brought the kind of October sunshine that makes even the most suspicious New Yorkers believe in fresh starts, which seemed appropriate considering we had just demonstrated that some fresh starts require completely dismantling what came before. The brownstone had exhaled. You wouldn't think a house could hold its breath, but for days ours had, and you could feel it let go. No watchers across the street, no nervous phone calls, no Fritz listening for the service door latch, like it might confess secrets. The return to order. There's a rhythm to the place when a case ends that I've never seen anywhere else. You don't get champagne corks and Broadway tap numbers. You get Fritz testing a sauce the way a violinist tunes a string and the elevator sighing as if it had finally consented to take a day off. The morning papers carried headlines that would have made Lon Cohen proud. Federal task force breaks academic corruption. Ring, university professor charged in conspiracy. And my personal favorite, detective work exposes data analytics scandal. The phone had started ringing at 8:30, but by noon the serious inquiries had been directed to appropriate federal channels and the curious ones to published reports. The deputy director of the FBI's white-collar crime division wanted a debriefing about similar operations in other cities. Apparently, Dr. Carver's network had been a pilot program for a much larger enterprise. When Wolfe descended from the plant rooms at 11 o'clock, he carried himself with the controlled satisfaction of a man who had spent 2 hours with organisms that never conspired against each other. The Cymbidium insigne sat turned exactly as he liked it. The silver trowel was back in its leather case, and Fritz's mace jar faced front with ceremonial precision. The personal reckoning. At noon, Doctor. Vance arrived with Doctor. Kellerman, both carrying themselves with the lightness that comes from having enormous weights lifted from their shoulders. Dr. Kellerman looked like a different person, confident, focused, and ready to reclaim the professional life that had been systematically stolen from her. "Mr. Wolfe," she said, settling into the red leather chair with the ease of someone who belonged there. "I came to thank you and to provide a final accounting." She opened a folder containing letters from universities, law firms, and government agencies. Columbia had offered her a full professorship with tenure. The Justice Department wanted her to head their new forensic accounting standards division. Morrison, Klein, and Associates, after Dr. Morrison's resignation, had offered her a partnership to rebuild their reputation for ethical practice. "More than that, Doctor," Vance added. The university was establishing the Kellerman Center for Ethical Financial Analysis, funded by settlements from the organizations that had participated in her destruction. Her reputation hadn't just been restored, it had been institutionalized. Dr. Kellerman reached into her briefcase and withdrew a cashier's check, placing it on Wolfe's desk with ceremonial precision. $50,000. Payment for services rendered, plus acknowledgement of the intellectual precision with which Wolfe had dismantled a conspiracy that had seemed unbreakable. The institutional response. The afternoon brought a parade of visitors representing various institutions touched by the conspiracy. The university's president arrived with apologies and assurances about new ethical oversight procedures. The city attorney's office sent representatives to discuss database security improvements. Even Northgate Logistics dispatched executives to distance themselves from their former consultants. Inspector Kramer's evening visit brought official confirmation of what we'd suspected. He settled into the yellow chair with the expression of a man who had spent the day dealing with complications extending far beyond his usual jurisdiction. "Wolfe," he said without preamble, "the federal investigation has uncovered similar operations in Chicago, Los Angeles, and Washington. Dr. Carver's network was part of a larger enterprise specializing in reputation destruction for corporate and political clients. The intellectual framework was exportable," Wolfe observed. "Academic respectability provided cover for systematic abuse of institutional trust. As for our dramatis personae, Jennifer Walsh had gone all the way in her cooperation, providing the kind of detailed testimony federal prosecutors dream about. David Klein, deprived of Dr. Morrison's umbrella, discovered that academic brilliance doesn't stop a grand jury. Thomas Brennan was explaining at press conferences that his office had been misled by bad actors, but the polls suggested voters noticed his smile didn't reach his eyes. Marcus Hartwell had stopped by with no lawyer and no agenda, asking for Dr. Kellerman's address, not to make trouble, just to shake a hand and say what needed saying about being guilty, but not of everything they'd decorated him with. The dinner ritual. That evening, Fritz had outdone himself in quiet triumph. The aroma of roast squab, perfectly seasoned and accompanied by delicate wild rice pilaf, filled the dining room. Wolfe applied himself to his plate with the focused devotion he reserved for matters of serious import. As Fritz cleared the main course and placed a delicate pear tart before us, Wolfe finally set down his fork and took a sip of his milk. He leaned back in his chair, a faint sigh of contentment escaping him. Wolfe's final observation: the pursuit of intellectual justice, Archie, is often more satisfying than the mere application of legal statutes. Law, by its nature, is circumscribed by precedent and definition. Justice, however, seeks a broader, more profound balance. He gestured vaguely toward where Dr. Carver had sat during our confrontation. Dr. Carver, for all his academic pretense, succumbed to a particularly virulent strain of intellectual dishonesty. He sought to destroy a reputation not through argument or superior intellect, but through manipulation and deceit. He used the very tools of transparency to create opacity and the principles of accountability to foster impunity. And he presumed to violate the sanctity of this house, I added, remembering Fritz's outrage over the mace jar. Precisely. That, above all, was his gravest error. To disturb the order of a well-run household, to violate the boundaries of a private sanctuary in pursuit of ill-gotten gains, reveals a fundamental lack of respect for civilization itself. His eyes narrowed slightly. Such an affront cannot be tolerated, for if the small perfections of life are not defended, then the larger structures of society will inevitably crumble. He picked up a slice of pear tart, examining its delicate layers. The appetite for power, Archie, can lead to a profound indigestion of the soul. Dr. Carver believed his intellect placed him above consequence, a common delusion among those who mistake cleverness for wisdom. Manners are the small change of ethics. Men who squander them rarely pay their larger debts. Archie's final quip. So in the end, I mused, it wasn't just about Dr. Kellerman's reputation, or even about the integrity of the accounting profession. It was about a mace jar, a disturbed orchid, and a general lack of good manners. Wolfe chewed thoughtfully, then swallowed with the satisfaction of a man whose universe had been properly restored. One might say, Archie, that the most profound lessons are often found in the smallest details, and that justice, like a well-prepared meal, is best served with meticulous attention to every ingredient. He took another bite of the pear tart, a flicker of satisfaction in his eyes. Now, if you will excuse me, I believe I detect a subtle hint of cinnamon that requires my full consideration. Outside, the October night settled into peaceful darkness. The surveillance teams had departed, the federal agents had collected their evidence, and the conspiracy that had once seemed so formidable had been reduced to newspaper headlines and legal proceedings. The client, who never existed, had become the professor who would never be forgotten, and the detective who never left his house had ensured that his domain remained inviolate. The brownstone was secure, the case was closed, and we went to table with the serene conscience of men who had defended both justice and the proper position of spice jars. Some violations, after all, cannot be tolerated, forgiven, or forgotten, particularly when they involve disturbing Fritz's kitchen, Wolfe's orchids, and the fundamental principles of civilized behavior. We had dinner, victorious and vindicated, while somewhere in federal custody. Dr. Carver was learning that intellectual arrogance, like any other form of hubris, contains the seeds of its own destruction.